we bear up ourselves after having unsurvivable losses. The all of her work deals with the only themes that matter, the themes that I want to immerse myself in and do immerse myself in books and movies, which are love with a capital L and love with a small l, and death and suffering and guilt and resurrection and atonement and coming through and being transformed. And but the other, I had a huge respect for before I had any contact with her, and I don't remember how we first had contact.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Well, why don't I'm not done with my introduction,
Okay.
but tell us. I have about
I'll
another
tell you.
45 minutes on the intro, but tell us how you made contact.
Okay, well, first I have to say that I am so profoundly joyful to be with Anne Lamott, who's been my literary heroine for years. I have read all of her novels and taken them apart to see how you do it, so I can do the same thing. I've read your books on spirituality to try to have more grace in my life, and what has been most profound is your books on child raising. I read Operating Instructions about 17 times when my son Max was little, and now that he's 15 and he's starting to pull away, Some Assembly Required is sort of my go-to textbook, because I'm in that weird state of I need to hold on, but I need to let him go, even though I don't want I don't want to let him go. I want him to live right in the house forever until he's 90 years old. Anyway, we met a long, long time ago when online. It was before I was pregnant with my son Max. I was pregnant with another baby, and I lost the baby at 3.5 months. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. And for some reason, I thought Anne Lamott would understand. And I was working at the time at a corporate job, and people were saying these stupid, terrible things to me, like, well, at least you didn't know the baby, and the ever popular, aren't you a little old to have a baby? So I think I wrote you, I'm not sure, I think I wrote her, sent her an email saying,
There was no email. You wrote a letter.
I must have written a
right.
letter.
You wrote a letter.
Must have written a letter to her, just saying, you know what, this happened to me, and I'm feeling really sad, and I thought you would understand. And I went out, and when I came back to my house, there was a message on the machine, and it was a 10-minute message from Annie, and it was the funniest thing I had ever heard. And it was the first time I laughed since I lost the baby. And I remember, like, when I hung up the phone, I thought, what kind of amazing person would do that to someone you don't even know? It was just the greatest thing in the world. And I said, you know what, I want to be like that.
But I remember saying that it was really, truly awful, and you would never get over it, and that was a huge relief, because people were urging her to believe that there would be silver linings and that there was meaning. Right. And I just said, this just completely sucks. And
it was what I needed to hear.
Yeah, and you should never get over this, because your heart is broken and you don't want it to seal back up, like Leonard Cohen saying that there's cracks in everything, and that's how the light gets through. But now I remember that, and you were so relieved that someone had just said, well, this is really the end of the world, and
right.
And here we are. So a number of her books have been about the fact that this is the end of the world, and yet here we are. And my favorite plot of all. And but the other thing is that Caroline, if you ask any number of writers, they would all say that Caroline Leavitt was the single most hilariously generous person in publishing, and that and that anyone that has been published has a chance of having been helped, promoted, encouraged, supported, tweeted, blogged, Facebooked, and in every way encouraged by Caroline. And to me, this just doesn't happen in the publishing world. I mean, it's like oil companies. It's about profit and loss statements. It's about competition. It's people jockeying for the very, very rare real estate that's left in publishing. Very few magazines and newspapers have publishing book reviews anymore, let alone pull-out book reviews like we have at the Chronicle, New York Times, and And I'm not sure where else, if there's more than those.
It's not that
I
many.
think the Chicago Tribune just started out. So it tends to be a world where people are very fear-based and in deprivation months before their book has even come out. They're bitter 2 months before publication about how little space there is to get the reviews. And so Carolyn has really taken up the cause of this and the ability to have this kind of promotional kindness and genius for writers just at the right time, to get you into her blog, to do an interview with you when it seems like you have sort of fallen off the radar. So, and that to me is just much more important than anything. She's consistently gotten great reviews, and then all of a sudden she had this massive New York Times best-selling book, Pictures of You, and we were having a hilarious talk in the car over here on just how weird it is to not be in this life and death struggle to keep your head above water all of a sudden, for people to actually really clearly love your book and to have bought copies of it and to have become foisters, more and more foisters of your book. And it's so exciting whenever on the bestseller list there's a real book, like a book you want everyone to read. You go, oh my God, have you read? Like right now I feel that way about The Lifeboat, which I'm trying to foist on everybody. But usually on the bestseller list there'll be like 13 airport books, and then there'll be pictures of you. And you notice that there's a real book, which is to say written with a very, very sustained narrative voice, an author who has had to keep 4 or 5 plates in the air, who has done it with grace so you don't notice the effort, and again, who is working hard to find the right verbs so you don't need to have endless adverbs and adjectives. A storyteller, and she is a pure and natural storyteller. The books are, as I said, they're about relationships, and they're about, paradoxically, also they're about our existential isolation, how really deeply alone we are. They're about families, and they're about endurance. I mean, they're about stuff that 19th century Russian novels are about. They're about moral responsibility. What are we morally responsible for? And they're about atonement and how we deal with the wreckage of our past without it, even as Americans who are used to just either getting the abyss cleaned up nicely by someone else or getting some cute rugs from IKEA to trick out the abyss a little bit more nicely. But instead, Carolyn's book is about how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the wounds? Where does community enter? Where does individualism enter? Where does the individual have an opportunity without religion, say, to hook into something big and magical and real that is so beyond our tight, clenched up, fisty minds sometimes? So there's a line of Rumi's I love, and Pictures of You really makes me think of this a lot. The great Persian mystic Rumi said that through love, all pain will turn to medicine. And at the beginning of Pictures of You, you have a catastrophic car accident, and it's almost impossible to imagine that this much loss and pain is going to be transformed through love and stamina into medicine, and yet it is. So I wanted to just start by asking you, where in your heart and in your history did Pictures of You first begin to get itself born?
Well, I happen to be obsessed with the whole notion of forgiveness, and the world is so difficult. I always think in terms of, well, how can people overcome the things that happen in their life? And there's actually another practical thing, which is my dirty little secret is that I don't drive, and yet I'm obsessed with car crashes. And I got my license to drive when I was 16, like every other 16-year-old kid, but all they made me do was drive around the block, and fools that they were, they gave me the license. So I couldn't drive, of course, and I kept taking these refresher courses. And at the end of the 3rd refresher course, the instructor pulled me over and said, "Caroline, some people just aren't meant to drive, and and I think you're one of them." So I came home and I was brooding about that, saying, well, I'm an adult, I'm a smart person, why can't I drive? And the more I thought about it, the more I kept thinking about car crashes. And to me, the main reason why I don't drive is I'm terrified that, what if I killed somebody? How would I live with that? And the more I thought about it, the more obsessed I became about it, and the more just images started popping up. And that's how the story started to take shape.
Uh-huh. You have a lot of, I think I may say may be true of me, but you have a lot of phobias.
Oh, yes.
So,
a lot.
Will you just tell us about your phobias and,
yes.
and how they work as a writer?
Yes, I have a lot of phobias. I'm afraid of driving. I'm deeply, deeply phobic about, I can't leave. I have to check the stove 5 times before I leave because, even though I turn it off, it might have turned itself on. And I'm phobic about being humiliated. I'm phobic about whether I can see people well enough or whether I can hear them well enough. I worry about when I'm starting a book, I worry about, will people like this? Which soon veers over to, and if they don't like it, does it mean that they won't like me? And what if I run into them on the street? And it just sort of goes on and on and on and on into this vicious circle. But I've come to accept that I'm phobic, and I've found that the more I talk about it, the less toxic it gets to me, and the more I can handle it. It sort of grows more diminished in size.
Yes, we were talking on the way.
We were talking about that.
We were talking about, I'm very phobic about the burners too, so I just don't cook. And because if I cook, then I just have to keep going back to the house, because in checking the burners, I might have brushed against one. Like if checking the left-hand burners, I might have brushed, or my butt might have hit the right-hand one, or the cat might have brushed up against it. And but it's as soon as you're talking about it with a friend or reading a book by somebody who feels like a friend, which somebody whose work you love does, sight unseen, you start to get your sense of humor back, and then you're like halfway home.
Right.
But we were talking about how the final frontier, the very last room you can ever open in your life is the money room. You can do a tremendous healing around your parents, your sexuality, your body, the whole thing, and then there's the money, the tiny little financial reality that maybe shaped you. And I was born in the 50s, and back then the women got allowances, and there was a lot of real torture by the fathers to the mothers in trying to get the mothers make their allowance. But it wasn't like a food allowance, because everything came from it. If the cat got a foxtail in its ear, that came from the food allowance, and that began this incredible wave of innovative cooking, because the mothers had to make do with less and less money, because the cat got the foxtails in the spring, right? So for me, I'm so well in so many areas, and then with food, I feel like food. Finances and snakes. Finances and snakes. And I'm afraid in Danville, I'm not as afraid, but I'm mildly afraid in Danville of snakes. But for somebody to write about it, if we were talking about it, we would start laughing,
right.
And we would recognize something about ourselves in each other.
But would you pick up a snake?
No. And in the new issue of More, and I was on a plane coming from Pittsburgh, so like already a nightmare. There's a picture of a woman with multiple snakes wrapped around her neck, and about confronting the fear of snakes by going to Bangladesh and finding these big boxes that look like they might hold folded chairs, only they're moving. And I read it just going, I was on the plane, going, but I didn't put it down. But anyway, that's that's the grace of finding writers who've written a lot of books, who are going to talk about stuff that is going to be, it's a relief. And,
right.
And the way that you feel about an author, I know a lot of you have this with Caroline, is you just feel so grateful, like, thank you, thank you, thank you. I thought it was only me. Right. So then I wanted to ask you this, we were joking about people always wanting to know this, but how did you understand, how did you come to know that you were going to be a writer?
Oh, that happened really early. I grew up in a little working class town, and it was a town where it was not cool to be Jewish. It was not cool to be smart. 1% of my high school went on to college, and the rest joined the Navy or got married very soon. And I also was very sick. I was really, really sick with asthma. And asthma is this very visual disease. I mean, you sound like an accordion, and your shoulders go up and down, and you can't breathe. And so I was bullied a whole lot, and I was rescued by the library. And I went into the library, and the librarian liked me, and she would give me all these books about lung diseases. But no, it really helped me because I learned about pleurisy from reading Mrs. Mike, which is this great book, and I learned about tuberculosis. And the next time I was out on the playground, when this kid would come up to me and make fun of me and like say, "Oh, asthma girl," I would draw myself up and say, "I beg your pardon, I don't have asthma, I have pleurisy." And this kid would look at me, and I could see by his face that he wasn't quite sure what I was saying, but he thought it was very interesting, and he left me alone. So I didn't want to just read books, and when I was reading books, I wasn't that kid with asthma. I was, a doctor in Spain or, a deep sea diver. I wanted to write stories. And my teachers gave me a lot of time to write the stories. So I was writing. One day the teacher was reading one of my stories, and she said, "Caroline, that's a really good story. You should read it in front of the class." And I said, "What, are you crazy? If I read this in front of the class, they're going to throw spitballs at me. They're going to make fun of me. It's going to be a nightmare." The teacher said, "Sometimes you just have to trust that people can be good." So I decided, okay, I'll try it. So I stood up in front of the class, and I read this story about a girl with asthma and a lion. And halfway through the story, the room got quiet, and I thought, well, everybody's either asleep or they're drawing pictures of me. And when I finished the story, they started to clap. And I remember listening to that thinking, this is really great. I really like this. And I began to think, I want to be a writer. And of course, my parents said, no. Girls don't become writers. You can be a nurse, you can be a teacher, you can be a wife. But that was sort of the siege of learning to say yes to all those no's.
Yeah. And what did you study in college?
I studied writing. I studied writing at Brandeis with this one professor I still remember his name, Alan Lalchuk. And he told me, he held up my manuscript like this, and he told me, "You're never going to be a writer. You just do not have what it takes." And I cried in class. And I went home, and I thought, I'm going to show him that I can do this. And it took me 5 years. When I published my first novel, I took it with the New York Times Review, and I sent it to him with a letter saying, "Dear Professor Lalchuk, you were wrong." And I was right. He was actually very nice about it, and he wrote me back, and he said, "Well, I always knew that you would be a writer." And I said, "Yeah." But I let him do that. But.
What was the experience of having a big success like after all those years of being kind of a journey woman writer?
It was amazing. It was amazing. I've had a very weird publishing history. I've had my first 4 publishers went out of business. I had a sales force leave the day a book came out. My last 2 publishers, who were big publishers, didn't answer my calls or my emails. Nobody ever sent me out on tour. I had good reviews, but I had terrible sales, maybe, just enough to buy groceries. So when I submitted pictures of you to my last publisher, they called me up, and my editor said, "We're not going to take it." And she said, "The book just is not special." And I was devastated. And I said, "Well, why not? Like, how is it not special?" She said, "It's just not good." So I called up my agent, and I was in tears, because after 9 novels, if you don't have sales in this economy, nobody's going to want you. And I thought, well, that's it. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to go to dental school or whatever else. I was sort of devastated. And then my agent said, don't worry. 3 weeks later, Algonquin, I call them the gods and goddesses of my life. They came into the picture. They wanted to see the book. They bought the book. And they called me, which was amazing in itself because none of my publishers ever called me. And they told me that they were going to change my life. And they proceeded to do that. Everything that happened to this book, I owe to Algonquin. I have a brilliant editor. I have brilliant publicists. And they sort of really restored my faith in what publishing can do. And all their writers love them. And I just worship them. And it's just been really astonishing. The first time I got a royalty check, I looked at it because I thought the number on it meant that that was the money that I owed Algonquin.
And then how did you start to understand that this book was going to be different? How early in the process?
It was really early. They started promoting me 6 months before the book was even out. And about 5 months or 4 months before the book was out, they called me up and they said, we're going into another printing. And I said, what are you talking about? It's not even out. And before the book was even out, it came into 4 printings and things just kept coming and coming. And I was just astonished. It was every day was sort of astonished, and I'm still astonished. It's just a very different place to be now than I was before. But which is why I always tell people, anybody who's in the audience who wants to write, don't give up. If anybody tells you no, don't listen. Just hear a yes in your head. And just remember that it took me 9 books to get here, and if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to mention that one of the themes that I love the most and relate to the most in your work, all of your work, is just how wildly dysfunctional we all are, and how highly intelligent, educated, conscious, alert, and decent people can fool themselves into living lives that are just full of delusion and denial, like Isabel's is, that she is clinging to a life that is really based on lies and falsehood, and she colludes with that. She doesn't see what makes what would make it impossible for her to stay.
Right.
Yes, and so it seemed to me that in a certain way, her having caused the car accident, even though it wasn't her fault and she's not driving too fast, she didn't cause it in one way, because it's foggy and the woman is parked in the middle of the road. In another way, you just have to pay. It seems to be the law of the universe, is that something has happened that's so threw the universe out of alignment, especially for this boy and his father, the widow of the woman who's killed in the car accident. And I wondered how conscious that was in the beginning when you were writing it, that she really did need to pay, that she had agreed to something that's really awful, which was to let her life go by while it was all just lies and her fears and pushing them away. And I didn't ask the question very gracefully, but I wondered if you could answer it anyway.
You know very little, at least I know very little about a character when I start out. I knew that I wanted her to be trapped in this life, in this place that she hated, which is Cape Cod, and that she wants to be a photographer, and she's working for like the lowest of the low in photography, which is this kind of Sears baby photographs, and she's in a relationship with a man who can't give himself totally to her. He's still in love with his dead wife. And even though she wasn't guilty of it, she was sort of guilty about it because she's running off. She doesn't have a plan, and she hasn't really evolved yet. And halfway through the book, I realized that it was really a love story between her and this child, Sam, and that her redemption was going to come from loving this child and realizing that by opening him up to the world, she was going to open herself up to the world as well.
And then April is the woman who she runs into and kills.
Right.
And you had told me that a lot of people, you were surprised that a lot of people just didn't like her.
Oh, they hated her. Some of the people really hated her.
Can you talk about April as a character?
Yes.
And
April is a very difficult character. She's one of almost all of my characters I love. And even though I loved April, I wouldn't necessarily want her to come to my house.
And why is that?
because she's unstable. She really needs medication.
Uh-huh.
But I understood her. I think she was this woman who really, really wanted to be a great mom, and she didn't know how. And the more she tried, the worse she made things. And she makes some very, very bad decisions with her son, and some of them are sort of unforgivable, which always to me rose up the question, well, how unforgivable is if you don't realize it's unforgivable, if you're doing it out of love? And she was just sort of a problematic character for a lot of people because they felt they wanted to see her punished. And I sort of wanted to see her understood, that here's this woman, and yes, she's made these terrible mistakes, and she's done terrible things, but she's trying. She's trying.
I found her incredibly touching because I'm so much like that. You know, I mean, I need to be medicated, and she's kind of annoying, but in to me, a very touching and recognizable way. And when you said that a number of people you felt didn't like her, it's almost like a moral judgment that she brought this down on herself, and that she deserves it. It's puritanical.
Right.
And but I think. I want to. There are a number of angels. There's a number of angels in this book, and I wanted, first of all, I mean, besides the way that we can be angels to one another, and are here maybe to be angels and to be angeled too. But how do you know so much about angels?
Oh, well. The book, first of all, the book was originally called Traveling Angels, and everybody at Algonquin hated the title. Traveling Angels is a screenwriting term. I also write scripts, and a traveling angel is a good person who comes into a small community, changes it, and then leaves. I also believe my two great passions are quantum physics and the mystical and the spiritual world. And the more I read about quantum physics, the more I realize that they're really very closely aligned. And I think there's a lot of things on Earth that you can't explain. And I think sometimes you don't need to explain them. And I do think that there are angels who come into your life, and whether they're people with big flapping wings or whether they're just more spiritual people, I think they're there. And to me, that's a really interesting idea. And I wanted to write about it, and I love the whole idea. In fact, when I was writing Pictures of You, sorry, wrong title, I went out and I bought this pair of angel wings. They're huge. They're like this wide, and you can wear them. And I kept them in my office the whole time, and I loved them. And they're still in my office, and I like to look at them because they remind me that what you see in this world is not everything that's out there. I have a friend who's a quantum physicist, and he tells me all the time that the universe is stranger than you can imagine. There might be parallel worlds with parallel you out there. And this is a scientist talking. So if a scientist says that, why can't there be angels? You don't know.
Do you? The Old Testament is nothing but angels, but can you talk a little bit about, you have a very rich and deep spirituality, and I wonder if there's any sort of formality to that at all, if there's a path. I've always felt that there was something else out there, and even as a child, that there was some other thing that was out there. The path is always sort of my own path and my own. I mean, I try to sort of commune with the universe, and I have a very open mind. I'm open to just about anything. And I just feel that it gives a certain depth to life. Sometimes I feel, I know it sounds stupid, but sometimes I feel that I'm here for a reason. I'm not quite sure what it is some of the time, but I feel a lot of it has to do with connecting with people, and hopefully it's through my writing. Lately, and we talked about this in the car, lately sometimes I feel that it's being able to be really open about what shames you or what embarrasses you or what you're struggling with. Because I think a lot of people are really struggling or ashamed about the same thing, and nobody ever really talks about it. And it's the same thing that you said. When you start to talk about it, there's always a collective sigh, like, oh, it isn't just me, which is what you said. Yeah. well, we had agreed that I would get half of the hour and that you would get half of the hour, and I have taken about 8 minutes of your time. But we really would love if you have questions about anything, about her work, about anything you didn't understand, about where to start, about writing, about faith, and anything at all. Sometimes the first question is sort of hard to formulate, but I have a lot more questions, but I don't need to ask them. But I'm wondering right now if anybody has a question that they were really yes in the very back stand, and we'll repeat it.
I have been a journal writer for probably 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make the transition from journaling to, say, for example, what I really want to do is write my mother's memoir?
Okay.
What was the question?
The question is that she's been journal writing for 20 years, and that what she would really like to do is transition into writing something that wasn't a journal, especially her mother's memoirs.
That's a great idea. Where to start? Well, unfortunately, you have to start with the blank page. But are you talking about in terms of writing it or in terms of selling it?
Well, in terms of writing it.
Writing it? Okay, so if do you know the idea that you want to write? Are we starting from that?
I kind of have an idea because now I have a daughter.
Okay. Well, what you should do is the first thing you want to do is brainstorm, is take that idea on a piece of paper and just write down everything about it that interests you about the idea, why it's important to you. Don't think about your audience or your readers at all at this point, because if you do that, you're going to produce something really generic. The way you're going to get readers is to just be really selfish about it and write what matters to you. If you really fearless about it and put the blood on the page and write what you really care about, other people will respond to it and care about it. But just be really free form, and as you're really free form on a few pages, you'll start to see things cropping up, making a pattern, and you'll start to see either a character that might interest you or a situation. Just sit down and freeform write, and make sure you write every day, because that's how you unhook your subconscious, so you can keep just writing. And email me, and I can give you more tips.
Great, because I know if I start writing my mother's memoir, I'm sure to offend every member of the family. I'm fearless about. I don't care.
I think you also need to be gentler with yourself. Writing is really, really hard, especially when you start it. And don't have too many expectations. Just sort of be open to what happens there. There's some other tricks, too, that, just email me and I'll tell you them.
Yeah. Yes, over in the corner.
Yeah, I'm just curious, when you talk about writing, are you physically handwriting, and is there a difference for you? So you type everything? Sort of a difference in the relationship between the words that you're sent out versus...
Actually, there is. I was about to say, no, I never write, but that's not true. Excuse me? The question was...
when you talk about writing, are you talking about physical writing, scribbling on pages, or...
Right.
Or computers, or
And is there a difference between
and is there
each?
a difference
between each? Okay, there is. There is a difference between each. When I'm talking about writing, I'm talking about everything. Writing on a piece of paper, writing on a computer. Most of my writing is done on the computer. However, when I'm traveling, and that can mean just taking a subway into the city, I always have a pad of paper with me, because I'm always trying to figure out plot problems or writing a line or two. And it is a very different feeling on paper than on the computer. Somehow when it's on the paper, it feels more immediate. When it's on the computer, it usually takes me about anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes to get into what I call the zone, where I forget that I'm sitting there thinking, I wish I wasn't writing. And it starts to feel good. But I think that it's really good for writers to do, to write it longhand, to write it on the computer. Sometimes I will take something on a computer and I'll put it in a different font or in a different color, because then it looks different and then the story looks different. This year is the first year I started reading stuff out loud as I was writing, and it was amazing, because all of a sudden this story seemed different to me, and it opens up a different area of the writing.
The secret of writing, I can tell you, for Meredith Moran is here, Caroline, for all of us, I can tell you the secret is it's bad writing. Is that you agree to write badly. You agree to kind of blurt and lurch and flail and to write a really bad paragraph. And then you keep your butt on the chair. That's actually BOC, butt on chair. You keep your butt on the chair and you write another really bad paragraph. And then you write possibly a third. And the voices, there are something like 37 internalized voices that don't think this is ever going to end up being published or any good, or you're beating a dead horse. And there are two voices that love your stories and your way with words, and they love what you're in the middle of doing. And so you listen to those two, and all you can do is write one more really bad paragraph. And then you put a period at the end of it, and you say, do we have one more really bad paragraph in us? And you will, and you do. And then all of a sudden, you know what you've done by accident? You've created a page that did not exist. That did not exist, a miracle. Yes, in the purple shirt.
Yeah, may I ask, you said you have two voices that agree with what you write, and everybody seems to have a close network, a mother, a grandmother, that no matter what you would write, would say so somebody who's aspiring to write, how do you go outside that comfort zone network to have your writing be looked at different eyes?
You have to be really brave, and you have to not show your stuff to your friends. You have to I find a lot of readers online, actually, like people I met on Facebook or other writers who I trusted, and you have to be willing to hear bad news and to really accept it. I always tell, I teach at UCLA, and I always tell my students that, when I wrote this book, I wrote 5 drafts, and I chose 5 different writers to send the first drafts to. And they all found problems, and it was all different problems. And then I rewrote it, and then I gave it to my agent, and she said, love it, love it. But you have to rewrite it. And she made me rewrite it 5 times. And then even when Algonquin bought it, and they loved the book, they still made me rewrite it 3 times. And you get to learn to love that rewriting process, because that's where the diamonds come. But you can't show it to the people who are going to be kind to you. Not that you want somebody to be nasty, but you want somebody who's really going to be critical in a helpful way and say, I don't understand what this is going on. Why did this character do this? And is going to ask the kind of questions that spur you on. And you'll know the right person for your work when you see it, because you'll know that they're asking you questions that make your mind start turning, and you start realizing, oh, I should have done this, or I should have done that.
Yeah, and there's a couple of other tools. One is like two people that you will agree to a certain time frame with, and that you're going to agree to have 10 more pages. It could be that, like Caroline said, you could find them on Facebook, or you could post a note at the local college and say, I'm writing a book, I'm writing a memoir, I'm doing this. Does anybody want to meet with me for a writing group at Rakestraw every second Thursday night? And we will show up with 6 pages, and that's the admittance fee. And the other thing is, you can get a mentor, you can get a writing person, and I know some, Caroline knows some, and people that will be a person that you can write to, and a person who's going to say, I have a friend, horrible Doug Foster, and he's been reading all my stuff. Oh, it's just awful. And he'll say stuff like, I am going to love this.
Oh.
And that means he doesn't yet. But it's a miracle for people to tell you the truth. And you become so dependent on, because otherwise you're going to send it to an agent. You're going to burn a bridge.
Right.
So find a writing partner, hire a writing partner. You need a mentor. You get to have a mentor, and you get to have an editor. But and it's something you have to make a priority, and you need to find the person you can work with who will birth coach you.
What?
There's a question from Amanda.
Oh, yes.
For both of you, how many books have you written that were not published?
Oh.
I haven't written any.
Oh.
Isn't that funny? I got published very early, so I have
I wrote, I have one that didn't get published, but I've bastardized parts of it into other books.
Oh, yeah.
It was early in my career, and there were parts that I really liked, so I saved it. But before I got published, I wrote many, many short stories that never saw the light of day, and I still have them, but they probably shouldn't see the light of day. They just weren't polished enough, but that's part of being a writer.
I wrote Rosie in, 1981, 82. My first novel had come out in 1980, and I gave it to my editor, who I adored, at Viking Penguin, Cork Smith, and he had me come to New York, and I thought it was because they were going to say, we're about to change your life. And what he said is that this is a book you're going to put in the drawer and get on to your next book. This book cannot be saved. Now, luckily, I was still drinking at the time, so I was able to work with that. And but what it meant doing was finding, I guess I kind of accidentally found a mentor, and I explained to that person what the book was, because obviously my editor didn't get it. And it forced me to dig so deeply into myself, just cut the BS, the seduction, the trying to write cute and funny and brilliant, and just say, here's my story. This is what the story's about. This is how they meet. This is how it starts. This is what has happened. This is what must be survived. This is what happens after we hear the knock on the door, which is usually the main thing that happens in a book, is there's a knock on the door or the phone rings. And so I've had that book, which has been very successful. I was told to put it away and get on with my life. So, but that was from the internet person. So, are there any of you that have any more questions? Yes, in the back, and then over here, Liz. Yes. How conscious are you of the themes of the book, and as you're writing them? And are they the themes because they're going on in your life, or because you have just wanted to tackle them and write a story to find out more about them?
That's a great question. Usually when I start a book, I'm not really aware of the themes at all. I'm just aware of something that haunts me. With Pictures of You, I knew that one of the themes was going to be, like, how do you forgive the unforgivable? I was really interested in that. And then as I started writing the books and the characters started coming alive, all of a sudden I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is about something else. This is also about how well do we know the people that we love, and how well do we know ourselves? And it just sort of started layering on itself. So by the 9 millionth rewrite, I started to realize, oh, this is what I was writing about all the time. I was writing towards it. But I really had no clue when I started the book.
Yeah, and I think one thing, just to piggyback with that, is the material really can be trusted. The material really seems to know what it is, and it needs you to be a reliable transcriber of it. And you're sort of like it's Rosemary Woods, and you're getting down. Some of you are a little young and don't remember our friend Richard Nixon's great secretary, Rosemary Wood, who accidentally erased 18 and a half key moments of the Watergate evidence. But these things happen, but anyway, but she was like an excellent and perfect secretary. And the material, I swear, will reveal itself to you the more that it can trust that you're getting it down authentically, and not trying to, burnish it so that everybody will think you're a more attractive person.
Right.
Yeah. Do you guys have any more questions? Well, yeah, over here, yeah.
Well, that previous answer was part of this question, the evolutionary process of writing an individual book. I'm wondering if you have a sense now with book 9 of the trajectory of all of your writing life in terms of what each book taught you along the way. And maybe this is sort of a cheating question, but do you believe that this is the book that deserved more attention than any of the other?
Let me repeat the question before you answer it, Caroline. But it was looking back at the trajectory of 9 books. Was there something? Did all roads lead to the Rome of Pictures of You, or is that what you were asking?
Yeah,
like, what did each one have to teach you? Where did the last one help you go on to the next one?
I think all roads did lead to this, but I tend to write about things that really haunt me, or that I want to understand, or that I need to get through, or that I'm just sort of obsessed with. And each book, even though each book is different, each book sort of teaches you a different thing in terms of writing. In terms of whether it all led to a book that was better than any of the other books, I don't know. I mean, I still feel that a lot of this book's success is really due to having a great publisher who believed in me. But in terms of like where I'm going with the next book, I think when you have that sort of backing, you're more willing to take chances in the kind of things you write and in structure. My next book that's coming out from Algonquin in the spring is all done, but the book that I'm starting now, I'm trying to do something with a structure that I've never done before, and it's really scary to the point that I want to throw up. But on the other hand, I sort of feel, well, I've built on it, and now it's time to sort of test myself a bit more, and I think that's what every book does.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask a question that, for me, one of the really crippling phenomena of being a writer is that terrible self-consciousness that you either are you want to recreate. If you've had a success, you want to recreate it, and you're also, as you're writing, you're hearing how the critics are going to respond to it, and is Michiko Kakutani finally going to even know you're alive, and is Ron Charles at the Post going to like this one as much as he liked the last one? And do you have tricks that you use to get past the self-consciousness?
Yeah, I try not to. As soon as a book is done, I try to start another one, because otherwise I will obsess every single day about what are the reviews going to say, what if they don't review it, what if this person hates it, and I try to stay off places that have, review sites where people can post reviews anonymously, because those are the sites where people will say things like, this book must have been written by a fourth grader, and then they'll go to all the good reviews and write, you must be in fourth grade if you like this book. I think you just have to really focus. One of the best things I ever did was become a book critic myself. I write reviews for People and for the Boston Globe, and the one thing that it taught me is how subjective it is. I mean, it's just my opinion on a book, and sometimes I love books that everybody else in the world hates, and sometimes I hate books that everybody else loves, and it's just one person's opinion, and that's a really hard thing to remember if you get a really horrible review that rips your heart out. But ultimately, that's what it is. And I also think ultimately books sell from word of mouth, from one person saying, I love this book, you have to read this book, and then the next person passes it on to somebody else. Reviews just sort of get your name out there.
Yeah, do you do Google alerts when you have a book out? So I mean, there's certain things
horrible.
you do you go to the Amazon sales rankings?
Yes, of course I
there
do.
Are these. There's this sort of crack addict
It's
aspect
horrible.
of publication.
Every 5 seconds.
Oh, and there's
It's
the
terrible.
Amazon sales rank, and it's stuff where it really talk about forgiveness. It's where it really teaches you to forgive yourself because you're very anxious. Is the book going to do okay? Can you afford to keep the family? Can you keep the new grandchild? And but you go to the sales rank, and God, it is so toxic. It is just so
It's
toxic.
terrible.
And then you have to wait for a certain amount of time to pass after the hour because it resets every hour or something. And then I'm sure you don't do this because you're a lovely person. Do you have? I always have a couple of mortal enemies with every book that I want to compare myself to see if they're doing better, if their book is going up, how they're trending. Now I know you don't do that. You don't even have to answer.
Actually, no, I do have to answer. Actually, what I do is I do have that problem. I make myself sick in terms of what other authors are doing. I think it's just natural. But what I do is, as soon as I see that so-and-so has a movie deal, my initial response is like, I hope they die.
Yeah.
And then, but then I say, that's terrible. I can't be that way. So I will go to that person's Facebook page and say, that is great. I'm so happy for you. That's really wonderful. Because I feel like, well, it's just better karmically, and then I'm not eating away at my own liver.
Yeah.
But it's natural to feel that way.
Every single writer does it. Every single writer.
They do.
And then there's this thing you can do called Google Alerts. And if your name is mentioned anywhere in the universe, you'll be alerted to that. And a lot of the time, especially when the book first comes out, it's all the reviews, and some of them might be really, really good, and some of them maybe are, you think they got it wrong. But then eventually you start getting to the blogs of like, and you get to like the, let's say, for lack of a better word, the really deeply crazy people online. And I got one today. It was by a lesbian grandmother, and she wrote, or no, she's a first-time grandmother, and she said something like, I cannot convey how much I hate Anne Lamott's new book. And I'm not making this up. And it said, she has nothing to teach me as a woman or a mother. And you just want to go, now wait a second. Wait a second. I don't think that anyone has ever heard of you, because she was a writer too. She says, has nothing to teach me as a woman, a writer, a mother, or a grandmother. And then you want to say, now what was your name again, Tiny Miss? But the forgiveness comes because other people tell you that they're doing it too.
Right.
And then it makes you, and then pretty soon you realize it's toxic, and it's kind of Pavlovian after a point to go to Amazon again and see that you're sinking, you're tanking. And then you start to say, do I need to hurt myself this hour?
Right.
No,
Right.
but I reserve the right to hurt myself next hour. Okay, and then you come back to it. Are there any more, a couple more quick questions? Yes, in the black and then in the white and black. Yes.
I've published a few books, and my publisher forced me to go on Twitter and Facebook, and I'm wondering how you feel about all that. It just seems so disingenuous sometimes to be on there trying to make people like you. And I just wondered how you feel.
The question was about how you feel about being on Facebook and Twitter, and is it helpful? I love it. I love it.
Me
When
too.
you're a writer, I'm in my office all day long, and it's me in the four walls, and it's my water cooler. I can get to say hi to people, and also I get to meet people. I mean, for one of my last readings in New York City, I got a list of all these A-list celebrities on Twitter, and I invited them all to the reading. I invited Yoko Ono and Timothy Hutton and John Cusack, and I mean, none of them came, but it was really fun to do. But the other great thing about Facebook and Twitter is in terms of research. If I have a question about something, all I have to do is post it on Facebook and say, are there any people here who were male nurses in the 1960s? And within 10 minutes, I have 5 responses. Also, I think that readers want to know writers, and writers want to know their readers. And it's a great way to do it on Facebook. You start to, because you're not always talking about the book. You're talking about what do you like to cook for dinner, or what don't you like to cook, and you're just talking about everyday things. I think it's a great tool, and it's if you're a writer and you're writing, you should be on it 3 times a day for not that often, just 10 minutes, and follow a lot of people, because they'll go back and they'll see your the thing on the top that says who you are and that you're a writer, and that's how you network and you make connections.
You have one of the few hugely successful literary blogs, and publishers are very excited if they find out you're going to write or interview them on the blog. And how did that come to be? I saw someone at an airport with a T-shirt that said, "No one reads your blog," but Caroline's blog is actually really, really sought after real estate. In the modern era.
It's very funny. It was a karmic thing. They said, well, you have to have a platform, and I thought, I have to have a blog. I'm going to just write about myself. And I did it for a while, and then I thought, well, there's all these other writers out here, and I really want to know about them. I want to ask them questions. So I started asking other writers, would you come on my blog, and I'll ask you questions. It'll be really fun. And the more I did, the more fun it was. And I started branching out, and now I'm really an intrepid Googler, and I found the costume designer of Stupid Crazy Love, because I really loved the dress that Julianne Moore was wearing. And I interviewed her, and now I'm interviewing film people, producers and directors. And yes, I'm doing it because I want them to option the book, but also I'm doing it because it's interesting to talk to creative people and find out, well, how do they write, and what do they do? And I just love doing it. And also, again, it's like giving back. It's karma to other writers, and it's helping them. And it's so tough for writers now that why not?
How do you know how many people read a blog? Is there a way that the blog knows?
I don't. There's supposedly there's a way that the blog knows, and everybody says I should get this little counter thing, but I sort of don't want to know because what if I get the number and it's too low?
I know. And you realize what a loser you
I
are.
You're like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Do you
And
have
then
another
and the
question?
woman in the white with the black trim, and then one over here, and then we're going to be done. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I wanted to ask you too. The question is, do you write every day? And I wondered if, in general, you could discuss your writing process for a few minutes.
I try to write like 5 days a week. I don't write on the weekends because I consider that's my son's time. And since he's a teenager, getting any time from him at all is difficult. So what I get, I like to get. But I work Monday through Friday, 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 hours a day. And I do this because it's sort of like priming the pump with the subconscious. The more you do it, the easier it is, even though it's never really easy. And I just try to be really disciplined. I get up in the morning, I have coffee, I go and I sit down, and some days it's great, and I would say 80% of the time, that's when you think about dental school.
Yeah. I don't know writers that feel like sitting down and doing it. I don't know writers who feel great about themselves. I don't know writers who say, this is just so cool being me. I've had all this success and, let me at it. You sit down and you do it because you've been given one, like in Willy Wonka when they get the 5 gold tickets. You got one of the tickets to get to be a storyteller for the culture when you grew up. And one of the things, just what Liz was talking about, is like, how did each book teach you and guide you to try the next book, which is maybe a little bit more ambitious or more layered or more archaeologically interesting. And it's that you put in the hours. It's like learning to play piano. You just do it when all is said and done. And I don't take any I don't say, now what time tomorrow might be a good day to start your work. I don't do that. It's like I'm too mental. And if I sit down at the same time, my unconscious looks at its little watch. My subconscious goes, oh, for God's sake, it's time to write. And that really, for every writer I know, is the system.
Hard.
Yeah, every writer I know has an equal proportion of narcissism and no self-esteem. And you sit down and you wear it out by just getting a little bit of writing done. Was there one question over here? Okay, go ahead.
Emma asks what your next book is about.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The question was what my next book is about. My next book is called Is It Tomorrow? Unless they decide to change the title, with no question mark on it, and it's coming out in the spring from Algonquin. It's set in the 1950s and early 60s, a time when people were very much afraid of communism, and there was a lot of conformity going on, and it's about this woman, Ava Lark, who moves into this small working class community, and she's got all these strikes against her, and that she's a divorcee, which is a very bad thing to be in the 50s. She's Jewish, which is also a very bad thing to be in the 50s. And she's also smart, which is not so good to be in this neighborhood. And she has a son, and her son is best friends with this kid, Jimmy, and Jimmy's sister, Rose. And one day, Jimmy vanishes, and it's this safe suburban neighborhood, and the neighborhood goes wild, and they sort of blame Ava because she's different and she has a lot of boyfriends. And the book just sort of follows what happens in the trajectory of these kids as they grow up and how they grapple with what happened to this boy.
Mm-hmm. It's time to go, but I wanted to end with one question that I know a lot of you have wondered about, and that is, will you tell us the story of the red cowboy boots?
Oh. Yes. Okay. So in my 9 books, I really never had a tour before I signed with Algonquin. And so when they said, well, we're going to tour you, I'm going to send you to all these cities across the country, I thought, oh, I need a talisman. I need something that's going to bring me luck. And I knew it had to be the color red because I got it in my head that red was lucky because I had a pair of red earrings, and every time I wore them, something could happen. So I decided, well, it also had to be sort of flamboyant because most of the time I dress like a New Yorker, which is just in black, and that's kind of dull. So I thought, well, maybe I'll get like some really cool boots. So I went on eBay and I looked for cowboy boots, and I found these boots, and I said, well, I'll try them out.
These very boots?
These very boots. I tried them out, and the first reading I had, it went really well. And I thought, these boots are good. So now I can't do a reading without the boots. Even if it's 100 degrees out, I have to wear them.
And this is what you will be like too.
Yes.
Can you put your shoe up so that can you hold your foot out so that we can see? And for the price of a hardback book, we will let you come up and study them up close with every purchase. And
it's very important, especially if you're really sort of insecure or whatever. If you have one thing that you can wear that makes you feel good all the time or makes you feel lucky, then it's very important to have. And eBay is great. There's a lot of really cheap stuff.
Yeah. So everybody, thank you so much. You've been a perfect
Thank
audience.
you so much.
Come on up and say hello and get your book signed. Is that okay?
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're